So I've been thinking more and more about the concept of a beyond left and right sort of political uh, affinity. And I talked about this recently with Mike on the Becoming Other podcast. And this idea just keeps sort of sticking to me more and more, despite, potential counter arguments that I can already sort of foresee. And I want to talk about Joseph Jordan Peterson, because he almost strikes me as a beyond left and right type of thinker, right? There's actually a lot of people I could say that really fit into that category, that going beyond left and right recently, but a lot of people don't understand them, and they sort of naturally try to put them in the two categories. So just to explain this idea, is like beyond left and right is it's essentially, it's a strong claim that it's not just you have an issue with the two political parties in the States. It's that you have a general issue with the two sort of directions along the political spectrum itself, right? It's like saying there's a fundamental problem with people thinking of themselves as leftists or rightists. Now, it's not a matter of dispensing with the concept completely, because it still has sort of a nominal function. It's more the idea that it only has a nominal function, right? So if I say I'm a leftist, what that means is that, I have positions that could be considered sort of left-leaning in today's world, but that's all that it really means, and all that it really is it's picking a direction, right? What it doesn't mean is that somehow reflects my deeper ideology as to what I think society should look like. And that's the part that's important. And that's the part that I think people really do miss. Because, people who don't know anything about politics, they might not be left or right. They might be sort of centrist. And that's not that's not a perspective I take, because people like that don't really have strong opinions. What this is it's like, what beyond left and right is it's what you become after you've been either left or right for way too long, and you've started to realize that there are not inconsistencies, but there are incompletenesses within. There's an incompleteness with any nominal political direction by itself. The whether it's left or right, if that ideology by itself can't possibly capture the reality of society well enough in order to create a vision as to what kinds of societies you can have. That's basically the idea, right? So if you say you're a leftist, right, that doesn't mean that you think that we should have a leftist world, right? If you are beyond left and right. Because the idea is there's no such thing as a leftist world. There's no such thing as a rightist world. Left and right don't actually describe the kinds of worlds we can have. And things like horseshoe theory actually, sort of fall into that space, because that's exactly what they seem to confirm, is that if you take the leftist worlds and the rightist worlds, they actually look completely identical. They look like mirrors of one another. And yeah, no fucking shit they do, because the ideologies are incomplete on their own. In fact, in order to complete them, you need the other ideology, right? So in order to, so this is sort of how the dialectic works. It's like if you start out on the left and you keep trying to think, and I remember this when I was like, far left, and you want to go to the far left and you want to try to perfect society and build the ideal leftist world, you're going to find that there's something that's missing within the existing theories. And you're going to keep looking and looking and looking to try to fill the gap and to really zero in and capture the the ideal picture of what the ideal leftist world is. And what you're going to find is that the missing ingredient will begin to resemble more and more what the right was saying all along. At least that's what I discovered as I was trying to find my missing ingredient for completing the recipe for the ideal leftist world, is that the missing ingredient was on the right. Right? Now that's a really scary idea, because that's sort of a foundational idea, because what it means is that the missing ingredient on the left is the right, and the missing ingredient on the right is the left. There's a complete symmetry between the two things, which means the debate isn't actually about the two sides, right? It's about something else. It's about something empirical, something specific, right? The two sides are just part of this dialectic, and this dialectic is not the thing that you can oppose, and you also can't. You can't be consumed by a question of whether or not one of the sides is supposed to win, right? Now, that doesn't mean that the two sides are useless either, because what it does is it sort of reduces their function. They still have a function. Their function is in sort of casually identifying the kinds of positions a person might have. You know, it's like, well, these seem like left-wing positions, these seem like right-wing positions, but that never actually turns into a framework or a blueprint for the kind of world we want to have. That's what that never does, right? Not at a deep level, right? The blueprint for the kind of world we should have has to come from outside left and right, because it has to be something that includes the dialectic, because the dialectic itself is sort of it's an eternal dialectic that's always going to be there. Which means if I come into you and I'm like, okay, guys, I have a blueprint for the ideal world, that blueprint isn't going to be a left-wing or right-wing blueprint. It's going to be a blueprint that includes the left-right-wing dialectic within it, you know? And what that means for ideas like communism is that communism or anarchism, these ideas need to have sort of an extension, right? You need to extend these ideas beyond what left and right actually is in order to have a sense of what they are, including the dialectic, because the dialectic itself isn't something that is something eternal. Meanwhile, ideas like anarchism are like, well, we need to crush the authoritative end. And the ideas like communism, it's like, well, we need to crush the right. And they're about breaking the dialectic. But you can't break the dialectic. You know, you can't break the sort of eternal opposite, the eternal balance of the two sides. And if you can't break that, what communism really is, you know, what communism actually is, has to be something that encapsulates the balance between the two sides, not something that, you know, tries to just say, well, one side is wrong and we need to go away in the other side, and that's the thing, and that's an attempt at breaking the balance. At least, even if practically you think we need to go far to the left, in theory you can't think that there is such a thing as going far to the left, because in theory you need to respect the balance. That is how beyond left and right ideas would have to work, you know? And I'm looking at complexitism. Complexitism at this point is pretty obviously would have to be a beyond left and right idea. But this is how beyond left and beyond BLR. This is how BLR ideas would work, and it's kind of fascinating. I mean, I wouldn't know how to take most of the, you know, a lot of the positions that people have in the political spectrum and extend them outside of the spectrum, because it's, you know, that kind of thing is very complicated. And in fact, it could be the case that you don't even have the ability to do that, because the simple act of realizing that of sort of the simple process of realizing that the spectrum, that the left and right, the balance between left and right itself is inherent, that itself sort of kills off a lot of these sort of extreme ideologies and what they say about the kind of world we can have. And I can certainly see that happening. But, you know, it's sort of like reconciling the left and the right, right? And if you think about that, that would be very useful, at least in the, you know, the current state of things in the world. So I want to mention Jordan Peterson, as I mentioned him at the beginning, because he's what strikes me as he's almost a beyond left and right thinker in a lot of the things he talks about. Like, just to get into this a little bit, his whole thing with, you know, the self-improvement and, you know, taking inventory and trying to, you know, make your bed or make your room, which I haven't done, that whole thing, and the sort of the process of self-improvement and the spiritualization and searching for a transcendent good. I like all of that stuff. All of that stuff makes perfect sense to me, and I think it's not just, it's not just good in like a casual self-improvement is good sense. It's not just good. It's actually very deep, I would say. It's actually very important as far as it's sort of, because it doesn't just mention self-improvement, it sort of embeds self-improvement as like a primary ethic, as a primary like objective ethic and objective drive. And I love the idea of objective morality. So that fits into, what I talk about with complexitism just fine. I like all of that stuff. My problem with Jordan Peterson, and it's not so much, and I'm not really sure what the exact reason for it is, but there's some sort of issue with the guy. For one, he spends all of this time with all of these right-wing groups. He talks with people like Ben Shapiro, and he constantly goes on talks on right-wing channels and so on and so forth, and it's just this weird thing. It's like, why? Now, his argument against that is like, well, these are the people who want to talk to me. Well, I mean, really? Like, I'm sure you could find left-wing people who want to talk to you as well. You just need to try a little harder. That's part of the whole issue with the left and right, is that you actually kind of need to try hard to get conversation to happen between the two groups, right? So I don't know if I trust him when he says that. Maybe he has tried, and it hasn't worked, or maybe he's not trying hard enough, or maybe he's just not interested in the kind of perspective that the left is coming from. But it's ridiculous, to say that in general, especially when you think of left-wing economics, for example. I mean, Peterson doesn't talk about the economic issue whatsoever, or anything. None of his analysis is at the economic level, right? Or even the system level, for that matter. All of his analysis is at the level of the individual. Well, no fucking shit. Leftists tend to analyze things at the system level. So, if system level stuff is missing from his analysis, it's either because he hasn't talked to leftists or he doesn't believe in that stuff. The question is, from the BLR perspective, is he actually potentially BLR, or is he just another conservative? Because if he is potentially BLR, and I would say it's not easy to be beyond left and right. The only way to verify that would be to see how he fares in the discussion with actual leftists that want to talk to him, right? And why such a discussion hasn't happened, I just don't know, right? But that would be the actual test. That would be the sort of the litmus test for whether or not this man is beyond left and right. Because a beyond left and rightist, a BLRist, would be willing to talk to anyone on the political spectrum, left or right, except perhaps people who are like mad, aggressive, and violent. So, and it creates a question, is like, well, there's no system-level analysis with his stuff a lot of the time. Is that because he doesn't believe in system-level analysis, which is what the left does? Or is it because he just hasn't had enough experience with it? Or is it because he finds it boring? I mean, based on what it sounds, he constantly talks about this, like, archetypal storytelling stuff. He likes religion and history, and constantly goes back to like, well, this is how things used to be, this is how things existed, etc., etc. It's a very old idea. Okay, but what about new ideas? What about new ways to changing things at a system level? That can happen, right? Even within the categories defined by his self-improvement, union form self-improvement thing, even within the framework of individualism, system-level changes can still occur, right? Does he not know that they can occur? Or is he neglecting that they can occur? Or is he just so afraid that they're going to crush the individual that he's ignoring that side of the analysis? Because I think the obvious contention, of any real, sophisticated leftist, is that changes at the system level can occur, and we need to explore those changes. Not that anyone's trying to eradicate the individual. No serious leftist is actually trying to eradicate the individual. Well, at least, consciously, that is. There are people who are trying to eradicate the individual without realizing it. You know, at least effectively they are, but they don't know that they're doing it. That exists. Certainly that exists. But at least, like, look at, you know, certain economists like Steve Keen, you know, Joseph Stiglitz, and Pettifor. Are these people trying to eradicate the individual? Absolutely not. But they have some pretty system, you know, some system shifting ideas, I'd say. And those ideas are not exactly, they're not, you know, traditionally left-wing ideas. Right, some people would say they're left-wing. I would say that those thinkers could easily be called BLR thinkers because they're not interested in just overturning the system. It's more like adding something to the system that has never been really added before in any official sense. So my point about, like, Peterson, I just to talk a little bit more about this guy just here at the thing, because it's not, because he would be like my ideal pick was like, this guy is what you think a BLR what I would say a BLR thinker is. And I've actually been more impressed with Peterson over time the more I've watched him. I've watched his debate at the Monk School, and I've watched him talk to Russell Brand. It's just both these things happened very recently, and I just want to point out I agreed with a lot of stuff, but I can already tell where his system level analysis fails. In the Russell Brand talk, like about an hour and 10 minutes in, they get into the question of the market, right, and how the market works. And Russell Brand talks about how the market's not a neutral thing. You can't trust the market, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, a lot of people will have a general distrust of the market. And then Peterson returns, well, the way you change the market is you make sure that the people in the market are good people. You know, you make sure that the people in the market are good people, and they're following this idea of transcendent good. But But the problem with that is that that's just cheating. That's skipping over the problem. It's like saying well it's like if I asked you, how does this heat bath change? Well, the particles in the heat bath would change. Well, no fucking shit, Sherlock. Of course they would change. That is obvious. How they change is the question, because how they change depends on how the system changes and how they think about the system, right? This is in the whole archetypal story of you know, self-improvement, Jungian fucking self-improvement as well, right? Because in those stories, the hero goes out into the jungle and finds something for his community, right? And helps the community. But how do you help the community? That's the question. That's the system-level question that the leftists ask, right? That you're just completely cheating over. It's not obvious how to help the community. Just like it's not obvious how to improve yourself as an individual. And you know, Peterson is correct that it is about this idea of a spiritual, this idea of like a spiritual self-actualization, I'd call it. It's not really a religious concept. I'd say it's a secular. It extends into secular ethics as well, just fine. But it is about this kind of like this identification with the self. Like Hindu philosophy also ties into that quite, you know, pretty well. This finding your true self, so to speak. That part is true, but how does the system change as a result of that? Because if there were a bunch of people in the system that realize their true selves, they would then realize that there's something about the system that they can change, right? And then they would make those changes, right? It's also a problem because how do you change yourself depends on the system that you're in, because it depends on how it reflects on you. So he doesn't get into that at all, and at least at the economic that has serious ramifications for how the way the economy works that I've never seen Peterson talk about. So, well, I mean, I haven't seen that much stuff, but I've never heard of him talk about it either. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. So there's an issue right there. And you know, the Monk debate. I mean, the Monk debate was totally useless. I have no respect for that debate. It was just a spectacle, I'd say. I don't understand why Peterson got as upset as he did when the guy said that he was a mean old white man. I mean, if this was me, I would have just said, okay, you're a mean old black man. What can they do? That's not racist in that circumstance. He did it, I did it back. There's no, what's the problem? But he just he shriveled up and you know, into his chair after that for some reason. Like, I don't know. I'm not a big sucker for politeness. So I don't know exactly why he took so much offense to that right there. So there is something odd about the phenomenon of Peterson, though. So it's not I'd like to say that it's BLR, but it's so, like, it touches on, like, its proximity to conservatism, which I don't have as much trust for, which is not explicitly BLR, by the way, is something that I don't exactly trust. That's what I'd say. And I do trust BLR, but there's no real BLR thinker out there. No official BLR thinker, right? To put it bluntly, I mean, I think I am a true BLR thinker. Complexitism is an actual BLR idea, right? But I don't see that much effort of actually questioning the paradigm itself. And probably it's a waste of time to question the paradigm itself, because the paradigm may be very, very useful. I'm even saying, like, move past the paradigm. Like, the paradigm might itself be so inherent that we can't move past it, and it is just a matter of one side beating the other. Well, I mean, sure, but in that case, I mean, my intuition says that that's not true, right? So other thinkers, either people haven't thought of this yet, or they haven't caught up, or they're just stuck in traditional, party politics because it's convenient for them, right? And I'd say that is the case for a lot of people, simply because, because people fall into the two categories so often. It's very easy to begin to think that one of the two categories, that the two categories somehow represent the reality of the political landscape. And what BLR is saying is that they don't actually represent the reality of the true reality of the political landscape. That's what BLR is saying, right? So you'd have to, to go past, you'd have to realize that, and I wouldn't say anybody else has. And of course, the obvious risk with anyone who says that, well, the left and right don't capture the reality of the political landscape, or the political spectrum doesn't capture the reality of the political landscape, yada, yada, yada. The obvious risk of that is because you're not really offering anything concrete or solid in return. Like, I'm not giving you an alternative political spectrum that tells you where you are, that people will naturally fall in with where their impulses lead them, and their impulses will just lead them towards the left and right, because that's what they know. That's what they already know. Yes, I'm aware of that. I'm not afraid of that, because I know enough not to let myself fall in with any of the to not let myself be seduced, so to speak, by the impulsive dynamics of the left or the right or any other, or authoritarianism or libertarianism or any of these positions on the spectrum that I think are limiting. I know enough, and I know enough about how to transcend it to know not to do that. I don't know if anybody else does. Most people, the more they learn about politics, will fall into one of the two camps, and then when somebody like me comes along and says, look, guys, the two camps are flawed, we need to think outside the paradigm, you'll just snort and say, Anton, you're wasting your time. Well, I don't think that I am. But I don't exactly have a concrete alternative for you just yet. That's basically all I wanted to say. And yeah, you have my opinion on Jordan Peterson now. I would certainly, he seems like someone who is actually very interesting to talk to. A lot of what he says, I just instantly connect with. And I understand exactly what he's doing. And it all seems very honest, right? So optimistically, as far as I'm saying, the problem with Peterson is that he's just ignorant of certain things, or that some of his knowledge it's his area of focus that's limiting his perspective more than anything else, and his exposure to the left and right, not genuine, fundamental, impulsive, knee-jerk disagreements with some of the ideas on the radical left, for example, or some of the ideas on the radical right. Because honestly, there are ideas on the radical leftists and rightists say that I'm just like, yeah, I hear them and I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'm okay with that. It doesn't scare me is the point. So optimistically, that's the case. Or pessimistically, he is just sort of like a conservative, really conservative person, and that's just the entirety of who he is. And convincing him otherwise would be impossible, which that is also possible. I'm not sure. It's hard to tell from this vantage point. But yeah, that is. And I just to clarify to anybody in my audience who does affiliate with the left and feel leftist, don't feel intimidated by. I don't want anybody to feel intimidated by this idea that I'm just like sort of appeasing Jordan Peterson here, and I'm not exactly right. I'm not exactly leftist myself, and I refuse to say that I'm a leftist anymore. Yeah, that doesn't mean as much as you might think it means, okay? I'm not exactly afraid of the left, and I'm not saying that your ideas are dangerous. I entertain left-wing ideas all the time, right? So that's not something that should be an issue. It's that it's that, like some thinkers like I would even say Chomsky and Slavoj Žižek, it's about moving in a more sophisticated direction, or that's how I'm interpreting it. But it's not, and there's nothing like really pathological about it. Anyway, cheers.